Cool. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Cluster API Provider AWS office hours on May 15th, 2023. Just a reminder that we abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which basically means just be nice to each other. If you could add your names to the list of attendees in the meeting notes document. This has been shared by Ankita in the chat. Thanks, Ankita. Again, also, if there's anything you'd like to discuss, I see we have got some agenda items, which is good. But if there is anything you would like to discuss that is not on that list, please add it to the list as well. And at the beginning of the meeting, we normally give time for anyone that's new just to unmute and say hello if they want to. There is no pressure to do this, but feel free to unmute now and just say hello. I'll give everyone a few moments. I can't actually see the whole list, so I don't know if there is anyone new. But based on the list in the doc, I don't think there is. So we can continue on. If you'd like to speak, if you could use the raise hands feature as well, that would be useful. Let me just see if I can, that's better. So I can see the list now. Yeah, if you could use the raise hand feature, and then you'll be asked to speak at the appropriate time, just so that everyone has a chance to speak. So if we move on to the agenda, so we have a PSA, which is that v2.1.1 was released last week. Goge did a lot of work on this, as did Ankita, and Goge used it as a chance to learn the release process, and I think he did 2 releases within 3 days or something like that. So yeah, it's great work by him, but also great work to get it out. It's been a long time since we've done a major release. We've done a couple of patch releases, but yeah, this was a significant milestone. Cool. So action items, if we move on to that, was there any action items from the last meeting? I don't think there was, so that's good. Brilliant. So we can move on to the agenda. So the first item, well, the first 2 items is Andreas. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring attention to those 2 issues. They're separate from each other. So I've been working on those for a while. Richard, you might remember this draft, which I filled by now. So the issue was that managed subnets are broken with version 2 of Kappa, which basically revolved around the ID field becoming required. So you cannot say anymore, I don't give an ID, please manage it for us. Please Kappa create infrastructure. So that's broken. And I listed a few options that I see in this draft document here. And yeah, basically just saying, hey, this needs a review before we put it in, I guess, in a GitHub PR, right?
Yeah,
it's too much for this meeting, but yeah, if you want, we can discuss a bit. So the options we had in an earlier meeting was basically to create a new CR or new CRD for networking, specifically either a big one, which describes the whole network, or smaller ones like AWS subnet, but I don't like that approach too much because it opens us up for becoming Terraform. So yeah, there are a few ideas in here with, yeah, advantages, disadvantages. So we are not in a hurry. So what we did at Giant Swarm is we basically took version 2 something of Kappa, reverted the bad change that caused this, and it's working for now. But yeah, keeping a hotfix forever isn't really great.
Cool, thanks, Andreas. Go for Ankita.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know the motivation behind this. Is it only because managed networks is broken, or is there something else we are also thinking with this
It was the
proposal?
trigger. It was the trigger. And then I think, Richard, you were with us in the meeting and you said, hey, the Kappa networking code isn't great in general. I guess you can say more about this one. And then we thought, hey, what about such a draft document that thinks about some options, giving more flexibility, for example, or maybe
Okay.
also leading to a rewrite? Not sure, Richard.
Yeah, it was totally. Yeah, it's totally. You're right. It was the trigger. There's been a lot of issues raised that are all related to the networking code in various shapes and forms. Some of them are specific, you know, regressions like this, but then there's things like, you know, totally private networks and stuff like that. And actually, the subnet code is pretty horrible. So we thought we could use this as the opportunity to completely rethink how we do the networking and make it more flexible and more extendable for the future.
Sounds good. Thanks.
So I guess the ask here is that if people are interested to review this proposal and
Sure. Yeah, we can work in the document with comments if you want.
cool.
No problem.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is, if it would be helpful, we could do more of a deep dive into this. Can we like some work for it for the people that are interested on a different time, on a different call, maybe?
You mean in the sense that people read it first and then we talk about it, or I rather give a deep dive?
Either way, either way, whatever works best. Mike has a comment. Yeah. So so this is what this is all around. Mike, I completely agree. There was, I don't know whether to call it a regression, but there was an undocumented feature that wasn't intended to be used the way it was, but it was used by people. And the decision was to remove it at that time, and that was a mistake in hindsight. So yeah, I completely agree. Things changed in that area.
Good. Then what about I suggest some dates maybe in Slack, see who's interested.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Cool. Just writing it down. Good. Then I guess we can jump to the second one. The totally different story. So if you use machine pools, and for example, in kubeadm config, something changes, like a file you want to add to the node or whatever is relevant for the node creation, an instance refresh should happen, so new nodes being rolled out, and that does not happen. And that's, yeah, it's annoying at best, because whenever you have a managed platform, like in our company, for example, and you make a change, then you have to manually trigger the cluster update, rolling all the affected nodes. So I've been working on this one. It's a bit complex of an issue. So there's the side of Kappa where this is wrong, where Kappa should trigger an instance refresh. And it basically has to do a diff of the bootstrap data before and after. And until now, it doesn't trigger an instance refresh, I think, while it should actually look into the bootstrap data, which is basically like, for example, a cloud init script, like lists all the files and commands to apply to the node once it comes up. And the issue is the bootstrap, so the joining token for Kubernetes is inside there. And that's a random value that gets rotated every 10 to 15 minutes, for example. And in that case, if that changes, you don't want to roll all the nodes because they would roll every 10 minutes. So that's not desired. So I have a PR open that improves the diffing algorithm a little so that it looks, hey, did something change in the bootstrap data apart from the token And if yes, trigger an instance refresh. So that's
Got
this
it done.
one that you're showing, I think.
Cool.
And that's still not perfect because this kind of assumes the cloud init format or assumes that the token is somewhere in the script in plain text. Not perfect. Ideally, copy would tell us, hey, this is the checksum, or hey, something changed or not. That would be great. And yeah, Daniel, do you want to comment first?
Yeah, I don't think I understand the problem. So from what I understand, right, if I have a machine, it's created from a template. That template is immutable. That is, if I want to update, right, if I want to roll out a different machine, I need to create a new template. And what I'm reading here is that rather than create a new template, this is an in place change for the kubeadm config.
Yes,
Which
exactly.
That I don't know. That seems to go against the cluster API design.
You mean immutability should be the design goal, or what is it?
Yes, I mean, I'm not saying that it should be the design goal. I thought that was the right. That is like the status quo, that an infrastructure provider is not is not going to pay attention to a kubeadm config. It's going to pay attention to the template. And
right, it seems to look different for machine pools. So for machine pools, what happens? We create an auto scaling group and launch template versions, and inside there you have this what AWS calls user data. So basically, what sets up the instance when it gets created. And inside kubeadm config, the spec, like you can set files or pre-kubeadm commands, post-kubeadm commands. So all those fields are relevant for node creation. And you can make actually relevant changes in there, like not the Kubernetes version, but maybe other things like adding files. That's already a relevant change. When you do then expect that nodes roll over, like new nodes get created. And that's not happening.
From what I understand, in order, right, that use case is supported by creating a new template, right? A new template that that would point to a new kubeadm config.
That makes sense.
Do you mean
Kind of treat kubeadm config as immutable in some sense.
Yeah. Daniel,
yeah.
when you say template, you're talking here about a machine template or the
That's right. That's right.
Not a launch template.
That's right. Sorry. Yes. Yeah, we have it.
Yeah, to be clear. Yeah.
Yeah, I am talking about the cluster. The Kappa AWS machine template that references, well, at least for machine deployments and I guess machine pools, references a kubeadm config spec for kubeadm control plane that's embedded. So that has it's slightly different.
Right, and those are mutable, apparently.
Yes, but I think if you do change you do change something in the kubeadm config spec in the kubeadm control plane resource, it will generate, I think, new bootstrap data. It will treat it as it will be an equivalent sort of rollout. If you, it's an equivalent behavior to, you know, creating a new template for a machine deployment.
Actually, there's a bug in there specifically for machine pools, where it should update the bootstrap token, which includes this user data script. It doesn't do that. I actually found that, so that's the second thing I'm working on right now. So what I envision right now, how it should work is, I make a change to kubeadm config, like adding a file or a command. It updates the secret, so the bootstrap secret, immediately, and Kappa also reconciles them immediately because it sees a change in the bootstrap data. And then the machine pool would also kind of immediately trigger an instance refresh because I made a change that affects the nodes. So I want the nodes to be recreated. So by design, I cannot say how the design should actually look like. Of course, you can also do something else, like treating the kubeadm config as immutable. But since it seems immutable, it kind of should bubble down all those changes so that Kappa could pick it up.
Yeah, personally, I'd need to go back and check what we do on the unmanaged machine pools when we make changes. Does anyone know off the top of their head the behavior there? Go for it, Cameron.
I recently fixed a bug in Kappa around this for the EKS side of this. So the EKS config, not the kubeadm config, would not be updated for machine pools after the first reconciliation until the change in 2.10 was released in 2.11. So this sounds sort of similar, but I would have to take a close look to see if that's the same sort of thing as that I saw on the EKS side. I can tell you that the machine pool is handling it's not great.
Yeah, that'd be quite handy.
Just wondering what should happen in general, like what we expect from machine pools.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I don't think we've ever honestly sat down and thought about the behavior that we actually want, because we've had issues in the past with AMIs, different versions of the AMIs in the same cluster, and not pinning it and things like this. So I don't, could be wrong, but I don't think we have actually got this nailed. Personally, I don't know if anyone else agrees.
I guess if you want, you can discuss then in the issue if expectations are not yet clear.
I'm sorry, I think I misspoke earlier. I meant to say kubeadm config template as opposed to the machine template. So at least for the machine deployment refers to the kubeadm config template. And that template is used to generate a kubeadm config spec for each machine. Mm-hmm. And that, so yeah, for machine pools, I'm struggling to remember what the
same.
Is.
You use the kubeadm config, but not the template. So you use the resource the template would have created.
So there's no reference to a template for a machine pool.
Correct. A machine pool either points to a kubeadm config or an EKS config.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, so that might explain the confusion. So
yeah, it's quite of a difference. Like, using the template totally makes sense. And then just a new kube ADM config is generated on a change. Because otherwise you will have to do that with, let's say, doing a checksum in Helm and generating a name based on changes. So that should kind of happen by this template type.
So it sounds like we need to take an action to revisit our machine pool logic in relation to this. Does it seem fair? And fully understand it, and
Guess
just
so.
see what changes need to be made.
Yeah, I would also like to. So machine pools is a still experimental feature, at least in Cluster API core, and right, there's ongoing work, for example, right, for machine pool machines to, I think, address some of the shortcomings of you know, the design, the original design. And so I wonder how this plays into it. I can't recall why there is a template for machine deployments, but not a template for machine pools. But yeah, now I mean it does make sense. There's really no alternative but to have this be a mutable object. But it certainly is confusing, because in some cases it's not yeah, for machine deployments it's just not an object that you're modifying directly.
Cool. And it'd be good to go back, and that we can also go back and look at the issue that that Cameron raised around the EKS config as well, and just see how related they are. Cool. Any more comments on this before we move on?
Fine to just take it as an action item and go on with this one. Since the feature is anyway experimental, we can make larger changes if we want to. Thanks.
Cool. Cheers, Andreas. So next on the agenda item is my item, which is around having a defined release cycle. So the 2.1.0 release was a long time after the previous release, and there was a lot of people asking pretty consistently for a new release, but it kept dragging on and on and on. So the proposal is that we come up with a defined release cycle. So we do have quite an old discussion issue on this. So it would be good if people had thoughts on this, to add it to the discussion. So, you know, for instance, do we keep it in line with CAPI, but slightly delayed to allow us to bump the versions and test, and also what triggers a new version from our side. So, you know, a new version of CAPI may do, but we also may want to trigger a new release. So yeah, so the ask is if anyone has any thoughts on that, just to put it into that discussion item. That would be great. Just anyone have any comments now on having a defined release cycle?
I don't find the raise hand feature, sorry. There's a comment by Akita, which kind of makes sense, saying that Kappa doesn't need so many releases as Copy, for example, but automation might be relevant.
Yep.
As maintainers, do you think you actually don't need so many releases? We should release more often? What's your tendency?
I think it's good to have a minimum release cycle, so we know if, you know, there's going to be a new release every. I'm just picking times out of the air here, but you know, every 2 months or whatever, or every time there's a CAPI release. I think that's as a minimum is good. But yeah, I don't know whether it needs to be for every release of Cappy. Again, is it just, you know, major and minor changes or patch change and all patch changes? I don't know. I think that's probably something we just have to work out ourselves personally, but I think probably get into the situation where we were before, where we had, you know, 4 months between a release and there were a lot of people depending on the release, and we just didn't do it and we kept pushing it back and back and back. It's probably not a good position to be in, especially if you're using Kappa, building products or services or anything on that. It's quite hard to plan. Go for it, Mike.
Yeah, from an end user perspective, having some predictability would be beneficial, especially if there's, you know, a particular bug fix that happens to be in there that you're looking for, that kind of thing. Doesn't need to be, you know, I'm not saying like, oh, hey, every 3 weeks, that sort of thing, but just some form of predictability would be, I think, a really good thing to have.
Go for it, Andres.
Yeah, so from my company's perspective, we are trying to follow stable releases, but it doesn't always have to be the latest one. I mean, in certain cases where we do need a hotfix, like the one I talked about in my topics, we do add them on top and do a release on our own. But I think most companies probably don't want to do that. So I agree that kind of this minimum cadence makes sense. 2 months or 3 months. I guess in general, maybe doing the automation first will help you a lot to define what makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, be good to capture these points in the discussion if you have time. Be super helpful. Cool. We can move on to the next agenda item. I see Vince is here. Vince, I did add this, so if you want to talk about this, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, hello. So there was some talk internally, like Red Hat, like to see if like there was enough interest to adding support for Rosa. Like Rosa is like basically like an EKS, but just runs OpenShift instead of, I guess, playing Kubernetes. And this is like basically like an offering that like it's managed by AWS specifically. And I thought it would be actually a good candidate as we talk about like machine pool getting out of experimental. I joined late, I heard some things. I'm happy to expand on those. But yeah, like upstream, like in Cappy, like we're trying to put machine pool out of experimental and also add like machine pool support in managed topologies through cluster class and so on. And so I figured like that this could bring more people from the Rosa team, basically like upstream, and just I guess like add more support for other Kubernetes distributions.
Does anyone have any thoughts? Go for it, Daniel.
I guess the one question is end-to-end testing of Rosa. How would that happen? And are there significant differences as far as cluster lifecycle is concerned, or is it mainly sort of developer differences for developers using the cluster once it's up?
For Rosa specific, it's mostly that like OpenShift works a lot differently than Kubernetes, like it just in general. But for Rosa, like it's like the same way that you would upgrade an EKS cluster, as in like you just make a call and say like upgrade to this other version. It's the same for Rosa clusters. So from that perspective, like it kind of works the same. That's why I see it like a better fit, like alongside EKS and other managed services. In terms of ETE, TPD, I assume that there will be a story, and we'll need to figure out like either credits or whatnot. But I'm sure that can be figured out. Like there's definitely interest. So I want to say that's like last of my concern, but the first concern is like, hey, can we make this work first, and then kind of like understand like how or like how the CNCF accounts can basically like work on the with Rosa, given that it's a like you need to subscribe to something or whatever into the AWS UI before you can use it. But I'll ask for sure.
Go for it, Mike.
Yeah, just one of the things, I agree with some of what Vince is saying, but one of the things I wonder as it relates to Rosa, and I don't bring this up to like naysay what's being said, it's just whether or not the Rosa and the related like ARIA or RO, the Azure version,
Yeah, sure.
belongs as its own provider. I just, want to make sure that we consider the idea that, OpenShift, whether or not OpenShift belongs as its own provider instead of being kind of side doored into the Kappa or CapZ providers as they go.
Yeah,
along.
that's another thought that I had too.
I mean, if it's easier to put them into, these ones, and I can get, Rosa and Arrow sooner, don't get me wrong, I'll be happy. But yeah, it's just something I do wonder about.
Yeah, I actually started thinking that like it should go like in a different provider, but then the thing is like then you'll have, I guess, if you want to use both, like both as in like AWS and Azure, and then Rosa and Arrow, you'd have like to install like 4 providers that import the same libraries at the end of the day, because they have to import the AWS SDK, they have to be configured like to use credentials and whatnot. And that's why I went back. It's like, oh, maybe we should just ask if that's okay to basically just put them into AWS so that like we can use the facilities that we already have to spin these clusters up.
Well, Mike, is your hand still raised from last time, or you got
just a quick response to that of, yeah, I can definitely see the value of it being part of Kappa. I just my biggest concern with it is just I just would be afraid, because it is a different distribution of Kubernetes. I just want to make sure that we're not going to end up. Yeah, to your point of like, I would hate to see 4 different, Kappa providers that do the same thing, or not Kappa, but Cappy providers that do the same thing. That would be really bad, almost as bad as having to shoehorn something in that doesn't quite fit. So that's just, I would hate to just end up having to somehow slow down Kappa or CapZ for something that doesn't quite fit. That would be my, that just, for some reason, that just worries me a little bit.
Daniel?
I think Mike, to your concern, we do have the ability, right, to mark a feature as experimental. So I think that's the right. We have that in place specifically for these kind of situations where we're not sure. It seems like it could be a benefit, right, to our end users, but we're not sure about the impact. One question that I had, I know that EKS has its own set of Kubernetes versions that are supported at any time, and that tends to differ from, let's say what Cluster API in general supports. I assume it will be similar for ROSA. Are there any concerns, about that? Just kind of thinking out loud.
I guess, yeah, plus one to mark the feature experimental. I think that's where we would have started anyways. Given that, like we don't even have an answer to the E yet, right? And then for versioning specifically and distributions, like I guess just to add like on the point before, it's like I saw almost as like ROSA would be, I mean, EKS is a distribution of Kubernetes. They maintain the patches, same thing as the GKE does. And I don't know about Azure, but these tools are kind of like a go alongside there. But yes, like the version would differ. I would from the Kubernetes version, I would expect though that Copy would like allow specifically, there is like a whole managed services like feature group being spun up upstream. So like we could use that as like a rallying point, like to say like, okay, how do we support like versions that look different than a Kubernetes version, but they are still a Kubernetes version somehow, and yeah, go from there.
Yeah, this sort of reminds me of a conversation we had a couple of years back, or about a year and a half ago, around EKS distro and supporting that within Kappa. At the time, there was pushback saying, "Well, this is it's a AWS specific thing." But yeah, it seems like this would be a vehicle to support things like that as well. So could be quite interesting.
What's EKSD? Like EKS distro?
So it's basically all the same components that are used for EKS in the cloud, but you can run them somewhere else. They have the same support lifecycle.
Is that actually EKS Anywhere?
No, EKS Anywhere actually uses EKSD. So EKS Anywhere is also the provisioning side that actually uses Cappy as well under the covers. But EKSD is the actual Kubernetes bits, and they're all the same as the EKS cloud offering.
So are we saying like you would have something that would spin up EKS Anywhere or EKSD, so they use Cappy to then spin up EKSD? You should go full circle, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't think we'd have EKS Anywhere, but we could have EKSD. So if someone was had an EKS cluster in the cloud, and then they had, I don't know, CapV. Well, that's a bad example, actually, isn't it? CapV could run EKSD. Yeah, so this wouldn't be a Kappa thing anyway. EKSD, really. Go on, Daniel.
Oh, it occurred to me, right, that at least I don't know how. So if we're talking about ROSA, right, we would have a managed control plane, but then we would be responsible for deploying bootstrapping workers. Was that right?
I would assume at a high level it would work the same as EKS does today. So like you have a control plane, I guess, but then you can spin up worker pools or node pools or whatever.
And to create or to bootstrap a worker, I don't think you could use Kubedium. Is that right?
Correct. No, yeah, you cannot use same as EKS.
And okay, yeah. So then wait, same as EKS?
Yeah, we have our own. We have control plane and bootstrap providers for EKS.
There's a separate bootstrap provider.
Well, they were completely separate from a cluster cull point of view, but actually we merged them into the same infrastructure provider, so the AWS infrastructure provider, but notionally they are, the infrastructure, they are Bootstrap and control plane providers. They're just not installed via --b or Bootstrap with cluster cuttle.
I see. Okay. But
And that
then,
was, yeah. Go on, Daniel.
no, it's just if there are if OpenShift needs its own Bootstrap, then that might be something that happens down the road as a separate Bootstrap provider that could be used, for example, in Azure or with other infrastructure providers, which I think that's something that should work in theory. I know that a number of infra providers, including Kappa, have been built on in many places on the assumption that it's a KubeADM Bootstrap provider. Not on not on purpose, but it just sort of turned out that way. But I think we would like to support or be more flexible, right, with Bootstrap providers.
Yeah, definitely. Or does anyone have any more comments on this? And I guess a question for you, Vince. Did you want people just to ping you with if they had any concerns, or did you want them to attach it to, the channel or anywhere else?
Channel, DM, or whatever works. That's fine. I think the first step is going to be like kind of do a POC of sorts, and then proceed from there. For the Bootstrap question, I think for as far as I understand, like this will just mostly using machine pools to begin with. So like, I don't necessarily think we'll need a Bootstrap provider or like a special kind of sorts. But I will confirm that before we put anything in place.
Cool. All right, that is the end of the agenda. Does anyone have any? Oh, Daniel, I see you've got your hand raised. Is that from last time? Or?
Sorry, I forgot to lower it.
Cool. Yep. So we are at the end of the agenda. Does anyone have any last items that are not on the list? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Cool. Well, we can call the meeting to a close. Normally, if there is time, we do hang on afterwards to do some bug triage. But as we've only got 10 minutes left, we can call it a day. So thank you all for coming, and see you again in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.